You ever notice all those ancient artifacts in everyone's quarters? Where did they get those things? It seems like just about everyone has one relic or another, except notably on the NX-01 Enterprise. I've been looking at the various crew quarters, but most people just have modern knickknacks. Archer has some pictures and a statue of, I think that's Zephram Cochrane.
And your hands sort of reaching toward the future.
Hoshi has a picture of a pink blob and a book. Reed has this thing, but I have no idea what it is. It kind of looks like a warped floor tile with some glaze on it. I don't think it's an ancient cultural artifact anyway. Tucker has this thing, but clearly that's just something he made to show his love of Bioshock. Nothing weird about having a massive bronze diving helmet on your wall. However, one crew member has some things that look much older than all that stuff. In T'Pol's quarters, she's got some kind of wall sculpture and we see various bits and bobs, but my eye is drawn to that weird horn thing. I think these might be the oldest artifacts on the NX-01, and they're in the quarters of the only non-human on the ship and the only person who's not a member of Starfleet. But in all the other series that take place later in universe, Starfleet officers have lots of artifacts in their quarters. I posit that the Vulcans were the original cultural pillagers, taking relics from civilizations that they run into, planets that they run across, and with the founding of the Federation and the integration of Vulcans into Starfleet, that habit rubbed off on everyone else. Let's take it in universe chronological order. Discovery. Here, everybody's Starfleet, but it's still fairly early on. At first, Burnham and Tilly's room has nothing, but later on there's a bit more decoration. The only thing I see here is what looks like either a rock or maybe an animal skull. I assume it's Burnham's, as she was raised on Vulcan and is the more likely of the two to have these kinds of things. But it may not have cultural significance either way. Saru, of course, has a ton of plants and he has a telescope in the background, no artifacts. Stamets and Culber have no artifacts either, but there's one character who does. Captain Philippa Georgiou. Apart from the various bits of rock and ship models, she has a small figurine and... honestly, I have no idea what that thing is, but it's man-made and looks pretty old. The only character who has artifacts is the captain. Starfleet evidently is still becoming acclimated to the idea of keeping those on the ships. The original series. At this point, they've got all kinds of crazy nonsense in everyone's quarters. Captain Kirk has this statue and this weird head, Yeoman Rand has this old figurine, and Uhura has a couple too. Spock has the most intense collection. I mean, just look at that big old statue in the background. Just look at that statue. Where did he get that thing? It figures that, like T'Pol, it's a Vulcan with the physically biggest collection. The next generation. The humans of Starfleet have now been completely corrupted. Absolutely everyone's quarters is just loaded with relics, presumably pillaged from civilizations they let go extinct in the name of the Prime Directive. Of course, there's the most famous example of Picard's alien nesting doll, which, by the way, he does not throw away in Generations. He gently puts it down and then it shows up again in his vault in Picard. It's the only fully intact piece of a master artisan from a long-dead civilization, but instead of going in a museum, he keeps it in his room and then in his giant safety deposit box where nobody else can look at it. Uncool, Picard. Worf has an old shield, but more importantly, he has this freaky face thing that looks like someone stabbed something into its eyes. Lieutenant Kwan, that's the guy who jumps into a warp nacelle by the way, has an ancient stone tablet and a frankly awful chair. That has got to be strictly for aesthetic and cultural pillaging reasons, not for sitting, as that has got to be the least comfortable chair I've ever seen. He's clearly got a theme going on though. Maybe these are all from his first visit to an extinct species world, so he's keeping them all together. But going back to freaky face things, check out what Lieutenant Marla Astor has in this recreation of her home. It's frankly horrifying, and it probably gives her kids nightmares. Her place is completely filled with these old artifacts, but really, I'm most interested in these flat face sculptures. You see, Lieutenant Astor dies in this episode, and her son goes off to live somewhere else. And then later, those faces show up again in Beverly's quarters. When Astor died, did they just loot her house and take whatever looked neat? It fits my theory, at least. They're perfectly happy to loot dead civilizations, and taking everything in Marla's house for themselves is just an extension of that. Lower decks. Similar to Discovery, the captain here is the one with the most artifacts. She's got a sword, a hat, what looks like an old cell phone, and in this reflection shot she's got some kind of old flag. The junior crew members don't really have any room to put things in the first place, and when Boimler moves to the Titan, he doesn't have anything to bring with him. Deep Space Nine. A good few artifacts here. Sisko's got this double face thing and a little statue. O'Brien and Keiko have, I don't know what it is, but it looks old. Dax also has a little statue, and Bashir has this old cup bowl thing that he keeps his teddy bear next to, bless his heart. And finally, Voyager. Not too terribly many objects. Janeway's got some kind of head, and a little thing that looks like a ski for one of Santa's elves. B'Elanna's got this thing. Tuvok has a bow and arrows, and Chakotay has these Native American things, but they don't look particularly old, and I think they're just legitimately his. There's also Picard, but that specifically is not about Starfleet, and Starfleet is what I'm looking at. There's Riker's house, which maybe has some sundry knickknacks, but nothing that looks like pillaged cultural artifacts. But maybe that's telling in itself. These sorts of decorations started out basically not existing in Enterprise, increasing over the years until peaking with a frankly absurd number of them by the time of the next generation. And then it seems to steadily drop through DS9 and Voyager. If it had kept trending upwards, I would have expected Riker's house to be filled to the brim, with statues and sculptures and all kinds of nonsense, but it's not. So my theory is this. Starfleet's Prime Directive, at least partially based on the Vulcan philosophy, means that they let several civilizations just die. When they do, they go in and scoop up everything left behind for themselves. They also run across a number of extinct precursor races and take whatever they want from those planets too. As Starfleet grew and expanded deeper into space, they eventually amassed an obscene number of these cultural relics, until eventually everyone kinda got sick of them. Over time, people started keeping less and less of them, and by the later series, nobody seems to really care anymore. If anything, they tend to keep things from Earth or things that they have a personal attachment to. Maybe they eventually win with the idea that the Prime Directive is actually kind of messed up, and they should stop letting entire planets of intelligent beings die.
Have you ever considered that the Prime Directive is not only not ethical, but also illogical, and perhaps morally indefensible?
No, Spock, I have not. And for the sake of your own sanity, might I suggest you cease doing so immediately?